Thank you. So today I get to talk about some of my favorite things that I get to do with my students and extension educators. So I'm excited to share with you something that we've been doing a little bit more than a decade and some of the benefits that we've discovered from some of those activities that we've done. So really, I'm probably not necessarily preaching to the choir and preaching to the choir here. We all have heard the numbers. We have a growing population. We have to be able to feed these people, but yet when we look at our incoming undergraduate students, the students that are coming in with an interest in animal agriculture, even in animal science departments, is fairly limited. We also know, and I think that the pandemic and the ability to use Zoom to interact with people around the world, making that more mainstream, it's become even more apparent that even if our students don't want to leave our state, that they're going to have these abilities to interact with people that are diverse from themselves, whether that be in an international context with somebody from around the world. And, I talked to them about being able to talk to somebody in China in the morning, right, and then go to work and interact with people in your own state. So some of these things are really important, and we talk a lot. In my realm, I teach a lot of courses in our undergraduate program at Purdue. I also coordinate our undergraduate program, so I'm really interested in building this awareness of these intercultural competencies with our students early on. I don't think we do enough of that in our programming, and I'm going to get in a few slides and how this starts to involve our extension educators. So I'm going to use the term a lot this morning, intercultural competencies, and when I use that term, I'm really referring to a person's ability to shift their perspective and react appropriately and also effectively in their ability to communicate in different intercultural situations. And again, this could be in a domestic context or this could be in an international context as well. And the 6 things we have here are sort of what we consider the main components of intercultural competencies. And I want to note that they oftentimes, if you read these, follow really closely to what we call those essential soft skills that our students need as they're developing. So that cultural self-awareness, you need to be aware of your own culture first, those worldview frameworks. What about the communication ability? How do you interact with people that communicate different than you, and how do you respond to that? That sense of empathy, your openness to others of diverse backgrounds, as well as that curiosity. Do you have a willingness and an interest to want to learn more? So study abroad programming has been around a long time, right? We had a little bit of a hiccup in 2020, 2021, where we weren't allowed to go anywhere, but study abroad programming isn't a new idea, but it's really a part of this group of this high impact practices, and these are going to be included with your undergraduate research experiences, your internships. A lot of universities have learning communities for these students, but they provide a place for students to have experiences that are really going to help increase that desired outcome that we have for their undergraduate program. Oftentimes, you'll hear the word transformative. It was a transformative experience for them. Study abroad or taking students internationally is something that has always been considered a high-impact practice, but a lot of the recent literature has supported that, and some of the work we've done at Purdue has supported that you can take a student abroad and you can take them out of the country and put them in different situations, but that doesn't necessarily equate to increases in intercultural competency. So we know what we do with these students when we're traveling abroad is really, really important for how they're going to develop these skills. It has to be intentional and really deliberate on the behalf of the instructor who's taking them on these international experiences. Now, when we talk about international agriculture and extension, right, as the world's becoming more diverse and as people are interacting outside of their counties or within their counties even more, our extension professionals, like our educators at both the state and the county levels, are going to play a really significant role in global agricultural production, right? So this international reach that our extension educators are starting to have, they're seeing it in their communities and they're starting to see it beyond. But we also know that we don't always prepare our educators to be able to work with these diverse populations. Are they able to effectively communicate? What about the international aspect? Are they able to have that global worldview of what's happening? So we have a lack of skills development. So the question really becomes, how are we going to meet this need, this increasing our intercultural competencies amongst our extension professionals? And I'm going to talk a lot today more about at our county level, our extension educators, and what we can do to help promote their intercultural development. So there's some limitations with our extension educators. So they may have access to study abroad programs, okay, but I've already told you a lot of study abroad programs, just going abroad, doesn't equate to intercultural competency development. That you can take students, you can take educators somewhere for 10 days, 2 weeks, a month, but that doesn't, you can't come back automatically assuming that they have those competencies that's developed. We hear over and over again, we know it's expensive to travel. We have limitations in our undergraduate populations that are financial, and we also see that same limitation with our extension educators. There's also, for those of us that do study abroad programming, there's some limitations in really understanding the most effective ways to incorporate extension educators into our program. Sometimes universities will have special programming that's specifically for extension educators or extension specialists to go abroad together, and these may not include undergraduates, but when we talk about that study abroad experience, how can we effectively bring them together? Also recognizing that fact that our educators, and Jessica just talked a lot about all the different generations, a lot of our educators are older than our traditional undergraduate students. So if you're taking this group together, how do you meet everybody's needs when you're doing that? And what I find might be one of the most bigger issues, as Jessica just said, we know that your career identity and the career identity of the students that you're teaching or that you're working with, that's been formed before they reach high school almost. It's very hard to change a student's opinion. If you've worked with pre-veterinary students who come in, it's really hard, right, as they come in as freshmen, to show them that there's other opportunities for them. And so when we talk to a lot of our undergraduate students, and it's not just at Purdue, but at other institutions that I've been at, they don't even know really what extension is. It's one of the land-grant missions, but they don't know what it is. So how are we preparing them, or at least exposing them to jobs in extension, if they're not even aware of what extension really is and what opportunities and programmings? So back in 2012, we saw an opportunity to how can we not only meet the needs of the educators with this growing need for intercultural competency development, but how do we get our students aware that these opportunities exist in this career, okay, especially since it's one of our missions. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is how do we actually achieve this? And our solution at the time, and when I say our, so Wendy Powers, who is now dean at, I think, University of Washington, their College of Ag, her and I worked together in the early 2010, 2012 to develop a short-term embedded study abroad program at Michigan State University. And when we first started it, we didn't really focus as much on the intercultural development. We were just really interested in seeing how could we blend educators with our undergraduate population that are traveling abroad. Now that was 14 years ago since we started that. I'm now at Purdue the last 8 years, and we've offered that program 3 times at Purdue. Dr. Powers doesn't do that anymore. She's obviously moved on to the world of administration. But one of the things I've really focused on and has really grown as part of my research program in the last decade is focusing on how to be more deliberate and more intentional in the activities that we're doing, both with the educators on the program as well as the students. And when we went initially, when I first started doing study abroad programs very early on in my career, I just thought, I take them abroad, I expose, and guess what? They're gonna come back more competent with these skills. And now, a decade later, we realize that's not in fact true. So we chose Vietnam. It's a spring break program. I'll tell you a little bit more about it. It takes a little bit of time to get there if you've ever been to Southeast Asia. But we chose initially the embedded study abroad model. And why I chose that program is that gives us a whole entire semester to get to meet with the students on a regular basis, have the educators interacting with students, and then we get to actually travel over spring break. So we get to spend time in country doing things together. We come back, and the most important part to me is when we came back, we have time to continue that reflective process of what just happened while we were abroad. Specifically, we chose Vietnam because Vietnam is really susceptible to climate change. I just got back from there in March, and every single producer that we met brought up climate change or the impacts that they're seeing on climate change on their production. They also have a really aggressive, I guess the government is hoping to pretty aggressively increase animal protein production in the country. So it's a great opportunity to understand how are they doing that more, along with the climate change issues that farmers are currently experiencing. So what our program does, like I said, it meets once a week for 16 weeks during the spring semester. We travel 9 in-country days over spring break. So you can imagine it takes from Indiana to Vietnam about 25, 30 hours to get there. So we get there, we hit the ground running for 9 days, and then we come back together. Students are assigned to teams to collaborate throughout the semester on a video project that we work on throughout the semester. I limit the number of students in this program to 12 because I want it to be a small number. And then we select extension educators throughout the state to serve as team mentors. And I'll get in a little bit more about that. But for me, this idea of an educator being the team mentor to these groups of students who are working on these projects, that was key to getting them involved before we went to Vietnam, but also increasing that general awareness. So many of you in this room serve as mentors and can probably fill up the slide with other things that we consider are important for mentorship. But this idea of group mentoring, we were hoping would provide students with a person in extension that they could talk to for career advice. They would have some guidance, not only on their project, but other things they were doing as well. Many of our students talked about, after the program was done, about the internship or being able to talk to their educators about internships, jobs, that type of thing. It expands the student network because now they're having this exposure that they hadn't had before, help them boost their confidence through these interactions with their mentors, but also their skill development. The mentors that we selected had a really vast background of experiences and things that they were able to share with their team. So how do we select the mentors? So I will tell you before I get into that I had funding provided by the College of Agriculture at Purdue to get this off and running a little bit at Purdue, so it would alleviate some of that financial stress of our mentors. So we offer the mentors these first few times that we've run the program $2,500 as part of professional development funds they can use to go on this trip. The nice thing about Vietnam is it is relatively inexpensive to go compared to if we were to go to Europe or some other places in the world. So it makes it $2,500 this past March pretty much covered every single aspect of their trip. So Indiana, we have 92 counties. Every county has an extension office. We have different program areas. We send an email out to every single office within the county, specifically targeting the county offices and extension educators that were located within those counties. So when they got the application in the email, we had several requirements that were listed for them, so they needed to serve as mentors. We let them know you're going to be serving in this mentor role for 3 to 4 students that are enrolled in the course. The students are going to be doing these video projects. You're going to have to guide them through it. They had to provide one guest lecture based on their background and their expertise. So for example, when we selected the people that served as the mentors, we made sure that not everybody was a dairy scientist or a poultry scientist. We made sure that there was some horticulture in there. So the idea being that when we were going throughout the semester, when we were in country, if we saw a farm, between myself and the educator, somebody was going to have experience and expertise in an area that could help lead discussion in that. So providing a guest lecture as well before we went to Vietnam gave students an opportunity to be exposed a little bit more to those educators and extension as well, because often they went into what they did as part of their extension role. The educators also had to agree to participate in some pre and post. We had IRB approval to collect data from the educators to look at their intercultural competence. So we measured it before the trip in January, and we measured it at the end of the semester in April. And they also had, as I said, they had to be willing to lead discussions while we were abroad. So specifically, in addition to mentoring, this idea, or everybody completed the intercultural development inventory. The students did this as well, but with the educators, this was a pre-post. It is basically a 20-minute quantitative scale that can be used to quickly assess somebody's intercultural competence. So you are able to see changes we've shown with undergraduate students and the educators that I'll share, group differences within that 16-week period. They develop an intercultural development plan, which is based on the results of their IDI that they took. And this allows them, the educators, select goals at the beginning of the semester, and they track these goals throughout the semester, and they're all related to intercultural development. What can they do based on where they're at in their sort of journey in that development? And then at the end of the semester, they provided a written report reflecting back on what those goals were. Were they achieved? How did they achieve them? If they didn't achieve them, what maybe were some of those limitations? Educators also completed some along with the students. So an example would be like a Who I Am poem, which is supposed to help with cultural self-awareness. Our students do that. We share it with each other, those that are comfortable sharing. So educators that were comfortable shared it with the students as well in the group. They did in-country reflective journaling, just like the students did. So these were very specific questions that were meant to help guide them in their intercultural development. And then they were part of that team project, which took up quite a bit of time for them as they were, especially when we got back from the trip, when students were rushing to get those video projects done. So in those 9 days, we slept a little bit. I'll tell you a little bit. So we were pretty busy. We visited all sorts of farms. We were in these are pictures from our most recent trip. We were down in the southern part of Vietnam near Can Tho, which is a little bit southwest of Ho Chi Minh City, about a 3-hour drive. We work with the university, Can Tho University there, so our students and our educators are able to interact with faculty, their students, other extension. They don't have extension like we have it here, but they were able to interact with some of the faculty that work a little bit more with farmers and the industry. So we visit everything. Obviously I'm here at poultry science. I'm an animal scientist, so we visited some animal facilities, including a broiler farm, but we also went and visited like a dragon fruit farm, a chocolate making facility, all different aspects of agriculture, and engaged with the faculty to learn a little bit more about what are these climate issues. And for many of the students, often a lot of them commented, this is very different than what we experienced in the US. In Vietnam, the way everybody talked about it, there wasn't a debate as to whether or not there were climate change. They were seeing it, actively seeing it on their farms. So that was something that a lot of our students and the educators pointed out. So this last trip, we had 3 educators go, so we kind of based the number with that 3 to 4 per participant. The very end of the semester, after we get back from Vietnam, the students continue to work with their mentors, and then at the end, we have a big celebration night on campus. So we invite the administration from the college. Students are allowed to invite their family, their friends. We actually, in April, had one student was from New Jersey. His parents flew in for the night, they came out for the weekend. And so they came out a little bit early so they could come as well. So each group gets up, they share their 5-minute video, they stand up there and they give, with their educator with them by their side, they answer any questions, and we just have a celebration of everything that they've accomplished throughout the semester. So our educator demographics, I only have 2019 and 2024 trip on this slide. They were most recent ones. We did have that lull about 5 years because of the pandemic, and so our plan is to start going annually again. But here's represented 7 educators. We've had 16 educators in total go since the start of this program at Michigan State. But you can see their years in extension. We deliberately try to have a range of not only expertise in the group, but also a range in their years in extension. So younger generations that maybe have only been in extension for a few years, as well as some people that have been around a little bit longer and have seen some changes and different things and have maybe a little bit more of a breadth of some of their expertise. And they have lived everywhere from very limited time abroad to quite significant time of 5 years or more of international experience before they go. So what I'd like to share today with you is the intercultural development inventory results of what we saw with our educators from just the last 2 times we went on the program. I'll also share at the end today a QR code for a paper that we wrote on Journal of Extension that shares a little bit more in depth about some of this data. But when you look at intercultural development, there's 5 different categories essentially that you're placed into when you take this IDI. And we have most of our educators it goes denial, polarization, minimization, acceptance, and then adaptation. And the idea is, as you move up the continuum, you've built these skills to be able to communicate more effectively, and you have more of those competency skills in adapting to different surroundings or times that are different. And what we find primarily with our undergraduate students is that they're in that area of polarization and minimization. Polarization being very much an us versus them, and it can be a positive us, like we do this better in the US compared to X country, or X country does this better than us. So we oftentimes hear when we go to Italy, it can be as it can be based on the things like food, or it could be based on values and beliefs. Like students sometimes will say, when we do our study abroad Italy program, the Italians are more family oriented than we are here in the United States. So that's really a polarization. Minimization category is really more where, why can't we all get along, right? We're all humans. We all have the exact same basic needs. So there's really, there's going to be some differences. I recognize there's differences, but at the end, we're all humans, so it doesn't really matter. And we found that the majority of our educators fell within this minimization or polarization area at the start of all the programming that we did. And I don't have the previous years on here, but it's fairly consistent in that minimization, polarization area. What we find with posts on the IDI, you get a quantitative number that puts you in one of these categories, and if it moves more than 7 points or so from pre-post, that's been considered not statistically, but significant change on that scale. So anything that starred in the difference is an educator that increased significantly on that scale of that 7. And so you can see Educator 1, the Educator 1 had that increase of 3.8, which wasn't significant. That educator was already in acceptance at the start of the program. We see oftentimes the most movement in people that are more in denial, polarization, and minimization. So we had 3 of the 6 that completed both the pre and the post increase in their quantitative score on that IDI, moving up from polarization to minimization, and then 1 educator going from that minimization to acceptance. And acceptance is where you're starting to slowly be able to actually change your behavior based on what you're seeing. So we were able to show quantitatively, and I don't have the qualitative data due to time. We'll go over some of it very quickly, but we also were able to show that development using qualitative data as well, not just the quantitative IDI. So we saw an increase in ability to cognitively shift during their programs. So educators were asked some reflective questions that they journaled throughout, and as well at the very end of the programming. So one educator stated that, I think I am better able to view situations and experiences from new vantages. I feel more open to other cultures, and I'm able to adapt to different situations. Another one mentioned really recognizing truly this global idea of this global system of agriculture. So this perspective, systems thinking and perspective taking, we had a lot of evidence in the responses that there was a shift in the educator's thought process in those areas. The practical knowledge and self-reflection, educators included their intentions to apply what they had learned. Along the lines with these 2 quotes here, we've kept track of what educators have done related to this program after they've left and how that has impacted them. So we're working on continuing to collect that data with some of the former participants of our extension. But it looks like that many of them talked about being able to feel like they had a better ability to recognize differences and be able to adapt their behaviors to meet those differences that they saw. So I have a couple more slides for you today with the limitations, but I wanted to share this. We were really fortunate. Our College of Ag communication office sent somebody with us in just this past March. And so she developed an exposure gallery. That's what that QR links to. And it talks a little bit more. There's quotes from the educators. There's quotes from the students. It tells a little bit more of a story of what we experienced during that journey that we all had together at that time. So I'm going to end today with some of the limitations, because as much as I would love to be able to take every educator abroad with us, there are limitations to this that we have heard multiple times from the educators. So the first one is the financial concern. So whether or not there's support there, we financially are able to support a little bit more of the study abroad programming and educators, but when we think about into the future, we're really examining more what are options for funding in the future to be able to make this more financially able for educators to participate. We also had several educators, those that didn't apply or those that went on the program, talk to us about they're very much oriented in their counties in Indiana. So some of the educators were concerned that their clientele in those counties were going to be concerned that they were traveling internationally and abroad. That for a few of them, that seemed to be a much larger concern than I would have thought of. So what are the counties that they're serving thinking when they're spending a week or two away going somewhere internationally? And they talked about how when they got back from the program, they were going to use the skills and what they developed to try to bridge that gap of that global idea. So they're bringing it back to the diverse populations that they're working with. There's also the time commitment of the program. And some were a little concerned about the role in their promotion process. So how much is this valued by their bosses within their role? So I'll end with you today. There has to be better ways that we can give this international competency development opportunities to our extension educators. So as we become a more diverse population, as we think about more broader global aspects, how are we going to give this population a better ability and give them those opportunities to develop those skills to work in this broad context? If we pair them up with undergrads in a way that might be unique, and there's other ways we could pair them up with undergrads, but we also increase that career awareness. So if we're thinking ahead down the road, are we going to have enough people to fill these jobs? Why are we in a land-grant institution and the majority of our students don't know what extension is or what it does? So this, in some ways, we can have benefits to the future of extension with careers, but we also can give those educators the competencies that they need to really be successful at their jobs. So I'll end with that. This code here will link you to the extension article if you're interested in that. We've had some additional work since then, but this one was primarily a lot of the data that I shared today. Thank you.